Hello everyone, welcome back to another Buff and Nerf report, where I'll give you a quick but accurate rundown of every primary, secondary and support weapon and stratagem that has been changed in the most recent update, so you can get the information you need to get back to spreading that sweet democracy for Super Earth. Just to note, when I mention a weapon or stratagem that has had stats both nerfed and buffed, I'll always start with the nerfs first. So with all that said, we'll start with the primary weapons and with the CB9 exploding crossbow. It's had its overall magazine carrying capacity lowered from 12 mags to 8 and a slight reduction to its explosion size and ergonomics. It has had its stagger effect and muzzle velocity increased, along with how many magazines you receive when calling in a resupply from 6 to 8 magazines. Next up, the BR14 Adjudicator had a well needed buff, starting with having its recoil reduced and having its magazine carrying capacity raised from 6 to 8 mags, and you now receive 8 mags instead of 6 from resupplies. The SG-8P Punisher Plasma has had its explosive fall-off damage decreased alongside its magazine carrying capacity from 12 to 8 mags, but when you resupply you will now get 8 mags instead of 6, and you also get a small buff on your projectile firing speed. The Arc 12 Blitzer gets a much needed buff, with its shots per minute being increased from 30 to 45, and I've been using this a lot more since, so expect a potential weapon guide in the not too distant future. My baby, the R36 Eruptor, unfortunately falls victim to the most recent nerfs by having its magazine carrying capacity halved from 12 to 6 and a small reduction in its explosive drop-off damage. I still recommend the Eruptor due to its versatility when pairing it in builds, as you saw in my most recent build video. The LAS-16 Sickle and the Scythe both had their mag size decreased, with the Sickle going from 6 mags down to 3 and the Scythe going from 6 to 4. On the plus side, the Scythe did get a deserved damage increase from 300 to 350. The Diligence and the Diligence Counter Sniper both got damage increases too, with the Diligence going from 112 to 125 and the Counter Sniper from 128 to 140, and a slight ergonomics improvement. Both the Liberator and the Liberator Concussive got damage increases, with the standard Liberator going from 55 to 60 damage and the Concussive 55 to 65, and unfortunately the Jar 5 Dominator gets its damage reduced from 300 to 275. I hope you all find these reports helpful, and if you would like to receive these updates regularly, please consider subscribing to be part of the Blaggers. Moving on to the stratagem support weapons, the fan favourite LAS-99 Quasar Cannon had its recharge time increased by 5 seconds. I don't think it's the worst nerf given how reliable it is with its unlimited ammo and decent accuracy, but it is something you have to adjust to timings wise. The laser cannon gets a slight damage increase at the cost of having slightly reduced damage against larger volume bodies. The OG gang favourite, the railgun, gets its armour penetration increased when in the safe and unsafe mode, but gets its stagger force slightly reduced, and the heavy machine gun gets a well needed third person crosshair added. The very popular guard dog rover gets a huge damage reduction of 30%, whilst the standard guard dog gets a small damage increase. With secondary weapons, the P19 Redeemer gets its recoil slightly increased, whilst the Peacemaker, Dagger and Senator all get their damage increased. The Peacemaker goes from 60 to 75, the Dagger jumps from 150 to 200, and the Senator goes from 150 to 175, but also gets a valuable speed loader added, which when reloading on an empty cylinder, your reload speed increases considerably. And as for the other stratagems, only a few were modified and all for the better. The Machine Gun Sentry had its health increased to match the other sentries, whilst the Tesla Tower had its health increased by a decent 33%, and the RL-77 Airburst rocket launcher no longer detonates when near stratagems such as sentries, resupplies, and most importantly near fellow Helldivers, so hopefully we get no more of those explosions that were taking out the entire squads. And although these reports normally only cover weapons, a few changes that made it into this update that I thought were also worth mentioning to you all was the overall burning damage being reduced by 15%, an increase in patrol spawns when playing with less players in your squad, with solo players be affected the most. Armour with the armour rating above 100 will now have reduced damage when receiving a headshot, and now when a bullet ricochets off an enemy it has a higher chance of hitting you, which I've fallen victim to a few times already. Out of everything listed here today, what change has affected you the most? What weapon won't you be using anymore? And more importantly, what one would you recommend to your fellow Helldivers? If you want to get some ideas, please consider checking out my post-patch build, which I'll link. This was a longer report than usual, but this was also the biggest patch yet. I hope all of you picked up some useful information to help you deal with that much needed democracy, and if you would like to receive these buff and nerf reports in the future, please like and subscribe, and also consider checking out the channel. And as always, I'll see you on the battlefield. Blagger out.